national technical institution led by Chai, the representative from different state and non-state agencies, development partners, UNEP, Center for Climate Change, everyone who is represented here today, our protocols observed. It is said that it takes a village to raise a child. And our gathering here today is testament to that, but more importantly, what an African proverb tells us is that if you want to improve your memory, lend someone some money. And what that means in the context of this discussion today speaks of the importance of money, that even the most forgetful do not forget where they are likely to lose their money. And when you put this within the context of the changing climate today, and building on the very excellent presentation that Naturela has put the conceptual and realistic perspective of the NDC project, Africa climate finance is legendary. It is legendary from the perspective that when it comes to climate change discussions globally, the world is already warming at 1.1 degrees today, and Africa is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. But more importantly, the vulnerability of the continent is such that the financing needs exceeds $3 trillion in the next 27 years from today. But what is more important is that Africa is receiving just a tenth of the $3 trillion that are needed to build climate resilience in the continent. And we all know that 12 years ago, the pledge of $100 billion in annual climate financing to developing countries by 2020 have not been realized. And as we're speaking today, the actualization by 2019 was only about $80 billion, and only 20 billion has actually come to the African continent, representing only 0.6% of the region's need. But as if that is not enough, the distribution of what comes to the African continent is skewed. An estimated 60% of all climate financing that have come to the African continent is concentrated only in 10 African countries. A continent of 54 African countries, but only 10 countries, of which Uganda is not one of them. And that is a major disconnect when it comes to the region's level of commitment. The region's level of commitment, meaning 98 countries as we speak today have actually ratified the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And as we're speaking today, over 80% have submitted their updated NDCs, with Uganda included, making Africa the most compliant region in the entire globe. But the disconnect continues, and is reflected in Uganda today. When you look at the disconnect, Uganda have ratified, updated the NDCs, need to be applauded for that. Ambitious NDC among those that have really happened in the continent. Uganda is actually among the first 5 countries that have ambitious NDC from the analysis we've done. Your conditional NDCs actually needs $24 billion and 4.1 being conditional. But however, the country, as we speak today, only gets about 3.9% of these needs, with climate finance inflows in the entire country estimated to be at 942 million over multiple years, averaging between 15 million and 621 annually. And therefore, within the context of the country having ratified the Paris Agreement, updated its NDCs, and yet at the same time the financial needs to be able to drive the implementation of these NDCs are not adequate, the need for the blended financing tool becomes critical. Because let's face it, international financial sources have proven that they are flowing either at a faster rate or even what comes is not enough. And when we face reality, the writing is on the wall. And this writing on the wall is very simple. That one of the major attributes is that the international corporate finance that dominates, that for every $1 invested in climate finance in every country in the African continent, only 80 cents are from international finance and only 14 cents from the private sector and 4 cents from national government. This scenario is replicated across Uganda and all African countries. And this is a serious issue and brings us to the essence of why we're here today. The financing profile, therefore, sends 3 unequivocal messages. And the first is that African countries, with Uganda included, best bet to bridge the climate financing gap is to increase the share of private financing, including local and private sources. The second is that to attract these private sources, there needs to be a prioritization of understanding how NDCs can be made in such a way that they are investment opportunities. They can drive socio-economic opportunities and prioritize credit support and credit guarantee. This strategy is such that we are not just having finance for finance, but finance to drive returns on investments. The third aspect is even more important. I believe that each of us must have bought something from a shop, and every time you go to a shop to buy something, the argument from a consumer perspective is always, what value will this bring to me? And therefore the investment in the NDCs cannot be done without also people seeing the returns on investment. And that dimension of an investment plan becomes important. What is it that when the NDCs are implemented, from agriculture to energy to transport to agroforestry to the forestry sector, across all board, what returns on investment can attract the private sector? And therefore, the investment opportunity inherent in NDCs are quite very, very important. But there's one important point that I want to highlight here. In the entire African continent as we speak today, 72% of all the countries' NDCs have not been converted into investment plans. That leaves us with 28% of African countries that have developed NDC plans, but unfortunately, they are not actually investment plans because they have just been costed on how much the implementation of those NDCs will actually be. But the returns on investment have not been showcased. And I'm bringing up this point to showcase the importance of this work that has been done for Uganda here today. I'm showcasing the importance of what this work brings to the entire African continent and to the world, because without NDC's investment to attract investors with a clear, well-detailed, elaborated analysis of return on investment that can approach multiplicity of stakeholders, state and non-state actors, individual citizens, formal and informal sector, then we would not be able to actually drive transformational development. And this analysis of returns on investment are quite very clear from the perspective that what this work is doing is capitalizing on the fact that sectorial dimensions have not worked for a very long time. Energy alone will not be able to drive transformational change unless there is an amalgamation, and also the dimension that mitigation powers adaptation is important for the case of Uganda within this project. What was done was to look at priority sectors to start with, because you can only start from somewhere before you go somewhere. And I'm emphasizing this from the perspective that in Uganda, 2 sectors, energy and agriculture, was chosen with specific actions that were focusing on solar power irrigation, agroforestry, and solar dryers, to show when you combine all these and implement them in a synergistic way, in a complementary way, what returns on investment can this accrue? And this is a simple series of actions to show, to do that there are policy actions, there are regulatory actions that need to be taken, and at the same time, investments then can come in from diverse actors to be able to do that. It's quite very clear that you have to build on empirical evidence, which this work has already done, to showcase that if you are to take that forward and combine and put some enablers in place, you can actually be able to achieve transformational development that is on a low carbon pathway. But let me just say something. We do not start from scratch. And I'm saying this specifically because sometimes we speak as if we are starting from scratch. No, there are pockets of successes that do exist in every African continent. And what we need to do is to leverage on that and bring logic and reason so that at least we can be able to make progress. Because to make progress, we need to build on what works and bring in innovations into that. And that's what this project is doing. And that takes me to the point where the blended financing tool becomes important. That's why we're meeting here today. The blended financing tool is to operationalize the NDC investment plan. So it is one of the tools. And it's very, very important. And the main thrust of this blended financing tool, as the NTI is going to present after this, is to de-risk the way in which credit is actually given. And I want to clarify here just a bit. There are no absence of blended financing tools in the world or in the African continent. But there is absence of blended financing tool to operationalize NDC investment plans. And therefore, when you look at the continent of Africa today, and this is an aspect that is not really always spoken, Africa is an informal continent. Over 80% of the population of this continent is in the informal sector, with over 77% of that informal sector made up of young people, who are over 60% unemployed. That applies to Uganda here today. And so to put financing in place that the informal sector can have access to, that our mothers and brothers and communities can have access to, that our youth can have access to be able to play a part in implementing the NDCs of the country is very, very crucial. And I think this narrative and understanding of this aspect brings a different paradigm shift on how we look at NDC vis-a-vis financing for NDC, making sure that those at the bottom of the pyramid are actually lifted up. And so for Uganda, this blended financing tool in the context of the NDC project that Naturenda has already given the context, actually is to ensure that at least we leverage on those priority sectors of solar power irrigation and solar dryers and the level of investment that are needed to drive that and how this blended financing tool can drive that, which is quite a very important aspect. And so the blended financing tool is a pretty much very easy tool that is to be able to have an understanding of how we can be able to de-risk already existing financial institutions at all levels within the country, whether it is SACCOs or microfinance institutions, where government play a role to provide a de-risking financing facility, where even individual or development organization can within their portfolio create those de-risking financing facility to de-risk SACCOs, to de-risk microfinance, to de-risk banks, so that at least actors, state and non-state, can be able to leverage financing for driving the NDC actions. And that question that I asked earlier, financing for what? Financing to drive NDC actions so that we can put food on the table and more money in more pockets. Without doing that and looking at it from that perspective, we're going to have this discussion around finance for quite a very long time. If we don't have that lens of understanding that when the bottom doesn't work, especially our youth, when they cannot access finance to do what can create jobs for them as they drive the country's national development, national determined contributions, we will not be able to drive transformational economic progress, and the youth unemployment will only continue. And this, as I've indicated, needs everyone on board. The de-risking tool is applicable at all levels. and will be leveraged both by the private sector, the state, non-state actors, and development partners, and this is going to be a public good that will be leveraged by everyone. And as I end, one of the things that have not actually been part of the mainstream discussion when it comes to NDCs is that we're in a continent today, and I'll go back to what I said. Over 60% of the entire continent population are youthful. 80% of the continent population is in the informal sector. 77% of that informal sector are young people who are unemployed. That then means most of them do not even belong to circles. They do not belong to commercial banks. And therefore, to engage them, to be able to access finance, we need them to have this tool applicable and utilized for both the microfinance, SACCOs, of course, commercial banks, so that at least there could be that de-risking from government in terms of either tax credits to them, waiving taxes, and at the same time even developing a financing facility that can come off in such a way that there is what we call a shot in the arm, that if you are willing and you've been trained to be able to develop a solar dryer, can that be enough that at least your risk level is lower, that a bank or a financial organization or a SACCO can actually provide support at zero interest rate finance that would be like seed funding for startup, especially youth driven. These are ideas, and that's what this tool is going to bring. And as I conclude, one of the aspects of this work is that the blended finance tool responds to operationalize the NDC investment plan. And as Naturanda presented, this is part of the work package 3 of this work, where the high returns on investment in operationalizing the NDC investment plan, this tool comes in to operationalize that and provide that opportunity for everyone in the community, in the country, state and non-state actors to leverage. But as they say, if 10 cents don't go out, it does not bring in $1,000. That means we must be able to take this very tool in a serious way, but at the same time, we want to hear also your perspectives on how we can better utilize this tool to make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Munang. Another round of applause for well-articulated concepts.
What is highly welcome, and of course clarifications, which are quite very, very important. I think starting off with the first aspect, which Dr. brought up on the climate cooling and the challenges that farmers on bananas are facing, and also the aspect that this is looking at solar dryers, agroforestry, and solar power irrigation, the dimension of alternatives that could also benefit the banana farmers from this investment tool. I think you are spot on. So let me just start by repeating what Prof. and the entire team said. The tool is starting from somewhere, but it is not only for solar power irrigation or agroforestry or solar dryers, but we have to start from somewhere. And what the tool is trying to do is that when you combine different aspects that brings return on investment and they are financially viable, that should be promoted, and then investment organizations, whether it is microfinance, SACCOs, or even the government, should then be able to provide a de-risking facility to support those actors in that field. And therefore, using banana peelings to turn to biogas and also fertilizer is viable within that. Because the point is, how do you incentivize action and enterprising opportunities that drive climate action in such a way that put money in the pockets of people and food on the table?
and banana peelings to banana peeling waste to fertilizer actually contribute to agroforestry because that is organic manure. Banana peelings to biogas contribute to clean cooking, which falls under the same energy. But also using solar dryer to dry bananas. Fried bananas, when you dry them, reduces post-harvest losses. So that lens is the holistic approach, but the intent is to then de-risk financing to drive this climate action solution, but make the financing accessible to those at the bottom who are the informal sectors or mothers in communities, banana growers, cassava growers, etc., and even young people. So that was a very important point. To your second point on the disconnect with the financing coming to 10 countries, I mean, it's a very interesting analysis that we did, and one of the reasons is, first of all, to be very frank on this, it's donor driven. And when you look at the traditional trend of the flows of this climate finance to the continent, most of it have actually gone to these countries, and there are three reasons. Firstly, because of donor relations maybe to these countries. Secondly, it's also because of the early enabling environment that those countries pose. And the third is also bilateral relations. But the point I want to make here is not necessarily for us to focus on the 10 countries per se, is what then can we do to attract what has not been coming? And that is the intent of this investment tool. Because like Dr. Awori, Dr. Awori, right? Sorry for pronouncing your name. Yes, Dr. Awori. He said something very important. You have to use something to leverage something. And when you can use what you have and show that it works, then you can attract more. And that is actually the point that if you look internally in all African countries spend $3 billion every year to drive adaptation from their own national budget. This was an analysis that was done by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So the question then becomes, if Africa is spending money for climate action, can that resources be used to de-risk to attract more investment from both within and external? And that is a debate that is not happening. So when Africa say we need funding, I think they are actually underestimating and underutilizing the power of attractiveness that they do have because they don't communicate how much they're even spending. But they spend $3 billion every year from their own national budgets on climate change. So the question then is, the investment tool provides the opportunity to use that money not for social endeavor, but for enterprising investment opportunities by de-risking, especially as Dr. Rich said, the accessible institutions that are closer to those who need it most, cooperatives, microfinancing, and of course even commercial banks for those who want to really drive bigger enterprising. Excellent. Then, lastly, I think Dr. Rich touched this point, which was, it's about human faces, it's about food on the table, it's about people, it's about real humans. And when I was in Nagasaki in March, and we visited a community that is actually a village savings and loans association, what a mother told me that as a result of a solar dryer that was decentralized through the Barbosa framework within Uganda, because of the Russia-Ukraine war that resulted in inflation and increase in food prices, they were able not to fill it because the cassava they produced, they're able to dry it and turn it into, and sell it into cassava, turn it to cassava flour and sell it for porridge. They now make more money and they're able to save more into the Perosa as compared to before. What does this mean? The solution sometimes are made to be complicated. But when we are able to then provide training to communities to be able to just have access to a simple climate action with the right training and with the right access, with the enabling environment to access finance, we can then see that people can create enterprising opportunities and as a result put more money in more pockets. I think I will stop there, and I think Prof can contribute to some of the aspects and gains and the team as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much to colleagues at the NTI, Professor Kari, for a warm welcome. Dr. Uganda as our National Project Coordinator, and my colleague Richard Munang, of course, from the regional office. Fantastic organization, and really good to have all these people together building consensus around what we're trying to achieve with this project. I'll give you a brief presentation, hopefully brief, not about NDC action, but about some of our other projects which are also implemented in Uganda, to try and provide some insights on some of our core research and technical assistance on market creation, capacity building, and investment strategies. And I'll give two examples here of technologies that we focused on in Uganda. But first, one summary slide about who we are. Some of you may have known our previous embodiment as the UNEP-DTU partnership, and before that there's UNEP-RISU, so that's going back. Richard remembers, and I'm not sure, maybe some others do. Last year we changed. We moved out of the university, and now we're called the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. Somebody described it as a rebranding, so that's. It also had a legal change because we're hosted directly by the UN, so that creates some opportunities, but also some challenges for anyone who's dealt with UN contracting, so for example. But we are the same people doing the same projects in the same country. We're a project-based research and advisory institution on energy, climate change and sustainable development. We're about 60 staff from about almost 30 nationalities, I think, based in the UN city in Copenhagen, with some core funding from the Danish government. So we have a steering committee, which is the Danish Foreign Ministry and UNEP. So they kind of oversee our work. We're a big part of UNEP's climate change program. And we report to the climate and energy branch of the economy division. So this is slightly internal, but just so that you know sort of where we are in the organogram. But of course we work with our colleagues in the regions, my friend Richard Munang, a long-time collaborator of ours in the Africa office, of course. And we have projects in around 100 countries. One of them is the TNA, Technology Needs Assessment. I think some of you are familiar with this. It's mandated by the UNCCC. And Kenya and Uganda were two of the countries that we've supported through TNAs in Uganda. It was my friend and colleague Maxwell Otin, as a focal person at the previous position in UNCST, did a great job implementing and overseeing that project, which is divided into adaptation and mitigation technologies. Very briefly, it's a prioritization and market analysis, essentially. In fact, we wanted to call it, well, a few of us suggested calling it the TMA, the Technology Market Assessment, because it's really about how do we create and steer markets for these technologies. It's not to get grants necessarily, but how do you stimulate private investment. So in the adaptation side, it was water, agriculture, forestry. Here you see a list of the technologies that were prioritized bottom up through a multi-criteria methodology. Some of you, I think, were involved in the consultations for that work. From that, in the tendering project, which I'll talk about next, we selected in consultation with the government rooftop rainwater harvesting as the priority technology with high impact and relatively low, relatively simple supply chains, we thought. And then on the mitigation side, it was the energy sector, and from that we focused on solar rooftop systems. So, I mean, the headline here is, from need to knowledge, which is gathered through the TNA, to implement.
And we need suggestions also. Alternatively, multilateral and bilateral funding can also be able to earmark a bit of any funding, either it is through projects, to then be able to support either cooperatives, microfinance, or even banks towards lending for a particular NDC support, either it is solar dryers, or it is biogas production, or it is clean energy, and that will still fall here. But when you go up, what you are seeing here, let me see whether this came back to normal. Which graph is still there? Yeah, but we shall overcome. So when you look, so the de-risking tool, how does this function? So the idea is the de-risking tool regulates in terms of providing support to the microfinancing institutions in terms of interest rate, At the same time, also in terms of loaning to those who have already been trained because they've been de-risked through training to then be able to pay back. But the main component is training, the de-risking tool, and insurance. I'll come to this side later. Why is there insurance? Assuming a mother in a village, in Nakaseke or in Gomba, where I've been there, they dry their vegetables, they dry their cassava. In Gomba, I was there in November last year. And they dry the cassava into cassava flour. They make bagia, they make daddies, they make porridge out of it. And they market this cassava flour to the community. They're putting more money in their pockets and food on the table. Assuming that these community that have constituted themselves into Village Savings and Loan Association under the bigger cooperative of PEOSA, because that's the cooperative that we worked through the Uganda Kingdom, which was an example that most of the lessons were integrated into what Dr. Onasmos presented today. Assuming that they don't have a market, they've used agroforestry, they've used organic manure, they've produced their cassava, they've dried it, they've turned it into flour. The buyers are not there, and they have taken a loan to pay. How will they will default? Therefore, insurance comes in here, going beyond climate and non-climate, but coming up with a market insurance, which is that insurance company need now to be educated and guided and trained so they can develop a product that is a market product to caution those who then are unable to sell their products even though they have followed all the processes. And that insurance de-risks the cooperatives, the microfinance. So that component of insurance is very, very important. So why I'm bringing this in is that when we talk blended finance, it's about money. But it's not about money. It's about so many components. And that's why the innovativeness comes in here. The innovative blended financing tool to operationalize the NDC investment plan. And from there now, the insurance package can actually be marketed to cooperatives to then integrate into the people who take the credit to apply in implementing. I can see Dr. Onasmo sleeping. That Matoke is working. Yeah, jokes aside, it was a joke. So so that is the insurance there, where put their timed repayments to coincide with season beneficiaries are most, where they are most liquid is where there are farmers there producing season. It's matoke, it's maize, it's cassava in season. So we can't expect that if a farmer or an entrepreneur who is having cash inflows in season can be paying monthly. So there needs to also be that engagement from that perspective with microfinance organization, so that at least they can be able to have revenue to support themselves. The last aspect of this, so we have the de-risking, we have the trainings, we have the insurance, and the last aspect of this tool is market assets, which is now coming up with ways in which what is produced can find a market. Whether it is burgers, whether it is briquettes, whether it is cassava. And the good news is that that is where UNBS comes in now. And we UNEP worked with UNBS firstly in 2017 to 2019 to develop what is called Kuma Omotindo. Kuma Omotindo. What that means is it's keep the standard, right? So the idea was, so it's a market incentive standard, which is if you produce working with environment, not against the environment. If you add value using a climate action solution that doesn't emit into the atmosphere. If you connect to market using ICT approaches, that means you are being compliant environmentally and you can then be able to fetch a market. And that fits very
strongly into the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, so that contributes to that. And those markets over there, the enabling markets using digital tools to enhance revenue for beneficiary become very, very important. Then it comes back again to this part, which is that no matter how much we do with innovative blended financing, if the beneficiaries are not de-risked through training, and where does those training come from? They come from CHI, they come from development partners like UNEP, like UNDP, like GIZ, GGI, etc., we will still have a big problem. So training them for what? To understand how to develop the products, solar dryers, fabrication by young people, waste to wealth, biogas briquettes, application of agroforestry, assembling of solar power irrigation. And once they are trained and capacitated, they are now readily available to then take loans here. And then they also need financial literacy, which the banks, the commercial banks and micro need to train. So it's a whole system approach that needs to be understood. Why I decided to go through this is the ideas in the morning were excellent, but they were coming in compartments that were all feeding into all of this. So when we see the entire picture of this tool as it's been designed like this, that is what we are trying to ensure that at least we enrich. And lastly, if you are here from the commercial banks, or you are here from SACCO, or you are here from an NGO, or you are here from Youth Initiative, or you are here from the multilateral bank, you notice that you fit into any of these aspects. And when we collectively apply this, that's an innovative blended finance tool to operationalize the NDC investment. Thank you very much.
Mindset that blended finance is about money. Thank you very much.
Actors will come in like CSOs or the youth that, okay, there is something there around the beneficiaries, but I also think they can also bring in some kind of capital and resources into the implementation, aside from the central banks, and I also think there will have the commercial banks. Apart from the central bank, we can bring in the commercial banks, which are also different from the microfinance institutions. So maybe we can emphasize that a bit and make sure also, because CSOs have a lot of grants. There are so many initiatives that are happening. So we could also bring them concretely as contributors. And then, as you mentioned, capacity development is across the board. So I also think it would run throughout, as you have indicated, from the insurance service providers to the beneficiaries, to the commercial banks. The issue of carbon finance maybe can also come in. I think maybe we can put it somewhere, because there are a number of companies now that are already implementing voluntary carbon market projects. So maybe it's also one of the innovative instruments. So we could somehow, I don't know where we can bring them in, and somehow also include that, because we are developing the guidelines, and especially in the energy sector, there are so many companies like Up Energy and others that are getting a lot of financing from the voluntary carbon markets. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gloria. We take note.
It was a town that time from before this hotel was built. This is true. This hotel was built when Boti became head of state after that's why it was called the Mission of Boti. But at that time, street, the main direction, just like donuts. Okay, government, central bank, it seemed different, but still, one direction. We might need to enrich, not the content, but the appearance, so that by glance of that, Yeah, that's the direction we're going. Everything around it, the various peripherals are heading to other direction.
We thank you very much
for explaining that picture. And I think the message is quite clear. But what I'm looking at is, in order to have finance in place, there is need for policy, there is need for regulations, which is the role of government, and then creating an enabling environment. Where is that in this? The regulations, the laws.
Thank you very much, colleagues, Prof. Gloria and Dr. Oduri. Is it Oduri, right? Yes, Oduri. Can I start with the last question from Prof? Dr. Oduri? I think it's very, very important. Let me go. So I think the slide up here will answer that. So the idea is, before you move to finance, your NDCs need to be investment friendly. And for your NDCs to be investment friendly, they need an enabling environment. And that enabling environment includes regulatory reform, laws, policies, and also some reform, for example, land tenure and ETC. Reform and policy, for example, maybe educational curriculum, educational policy change that integrate even uptake of climate action solutions from an entrepreneurship perspective. So it's a whole thing. So what CHAI and the government and partners, UNEP, are doing is that before we move to the investment, to the innovative blended finance, we have to set up the NDC investment plan. And the NDC investment plan, as you can see, don't really get bothered about the 3 priority areas. These are examples, because we need to start off on somewhere. But it applies the same, whether it's to transport, is to other aspects, forestry, it doesn't matter. So the idea is, in your NDCs, there are priorities that have been put in place, and those priorities that have been put in place need to be implemented in such a way that they are not socially driven only to build resilience, but also to provide returns on investment, so that private sector and other actors can come in to invest because they see a return on investment. And I think the presentation by Dr. Onasmos this morning was very clear. And before I touch this part, let me just say what I said in the morning. Africa is not starting from scratch. There's no single country that is starting from scratch. There are pockets of success stories: solar power irrigation, solar dryers, agroforestry. But what is missing is the ability to make sure that at least the dimension of a return on investment, when they are implemented in a synergistic way, can be seen very clearly. And building on that empirical data, that was done as it was shown this morning, but the most important aspect that I wanted to go up to is up at the end, where the analysis that is being done is looking at, yes, Uganda have revised the NDCs. Excellent. They've submitted. 15% of the funding is going to come from the country, which is unconditional. The remaining 75 or 85 will come from support from the international community. The point then becomes, what do we need to ensure that there is an enabling environment which is responding to your question? And that is what this work is trying to do. It will show gaps of the necessary policies that are missing or that can be updated. And one of the biggest recommendation that is already coming out is that one of the ways to create an enabling environment is also to provide either levies, tax incentives,
and at the same time, enabling laws that can also help lower interest rates. That's the recommendation. And this will be put in a compendium of recommendations that then get presented for government to act on. That you cannot be the one to create a regulatory reform. It's not development agency. They can only be able to work, analyze like we're doing here, use the experts and then present to the necessary, and the government is here. Ministry of Environment is here, Ministry of Finance is here, Ministry of Energy is here. This information then gets carried to that. So why I wanted to bring this was to clarify the fact that the blended financing tool is responding to implementing, and it is just one aspect on the enabling aspect that is needed. So let's not see finance as the only impediment to driving the implementation of the NDCs or building climate resilience. It's an aspect. Why we focus on it is also because climate finance is a hot topic. And it is also the turbocharger or the lifeline of operationalizing you can train people. If they don't have the resources to be able to access the needed materials that they need to move forward, then they will still not be able to move. Now back to the question. Now let me come back to then the diagram. Yes, so the concessional loans and grants, etc. So the idea is this: concessional loans for what? That's the question. Grants for what? That's the question. Grants and of course, the truth is like what I presented in the morning is out of the 100 billion, 12 years after, 80 billion rest, only 20 billion to Africa, and mostly traced to 10 countries. The question then is not, should be then, and what did it do? That's another question. What if that was leveraged as a de-risk, was leveraged to de-risk institutions at a national level to provide accessible credit at a low or zero interest rate to communities, and a bit of it grants to those who cannot be able to afford a repayback, but using structures that are financially viable with some fiduciary responsibility and know-how to ensure accountability and traceability. Because one of the things that we've noticed with the work on climate change is that traceability of actions is a big issue, as well as accountability sometimes. But when you use, for example, a cooperative that is communal in nature and there are 150 people in it, you can easily use that structure to trace actions, impacts, beneficiaries, and easily see how transformation happens. So the idea is to move now to Prof's question, which is, where is the street light? Putting the street light up front will be premature without this discussion here. Because then we'll be doing a predetermination or putting the cart in front of the horse and then over empowering an aspect that might not necessarily need that power. Inverted commas, open and close. And therefore, the street light will come after this discussion, and maybe yellow in nature, as you said. Yes, so the idea is that if you notice the central government, let me use central government, let's just, first of all, government create the enabling environment. And I started by saying, if the issue is high interest rates, it's government that have to play a role. If the issue is levies, it's government. If the issue is taxes, it's government. If the issue is making sure that these incentives are put in place, government. But at the same time, to Gloria's question, Gloria, yes, I want to answer your question. Can I proceed? Excellent. Your question is, where are the youth? Where are CSOs? Where is carbon market?
The idea is that carbon market, which is worth 460 billion in the continent, is an area that is coming up very strongly, and there's going to be a lot of revenue that is generated. The question is, if that revenue is generated, how can it be used to catalyze more accessible financing to the communities and to young people? You will still notice that you will have to still incentivize and use your commercial banks, your cooperatives, and other microfinance institutions to loan to young people. And you ask where CSOs can fit. Actually, the informal sector, startups are here, young people are here, and the idea is that you don't just move straight to give them money. You have to train them, because that's the biggest de-risking that needs to happen. If you throw 3 trillion today to young people, you know the answer. Party after party, right? If you give an idea to a well-trained, highly skilled young person who have learned how to turn waste to fuel briquettes, that idea will be turned into millions or billions, because he's already known how to do it. If you were to give him just $1,000, the next day you will see him already producing something. Give that same $1,000 to a young person. I'm just using young here as a benchmark. Not that, that if you give it to an elder person who is not also trained, he will do it. No, I'm just using because it's easier. I can see Christy smiling. Give the $1,000 to someone who doesn't have a skill, and he becomes the biggest risky asset. Because he eats the money, he doesn't have the skill, and he doesn't have the money. And I think when it comes to climate financing, Dr. Ari, as you said, a lot of elements are missed out. And so what this is being brought up is not to prevent GCF money, not to prevent JET money, not that when the money comes, are we investment ready at all levels of society? Thank you.
It's not responsive like it's a. I mean, this tool is to be enriched by. That's why we are gathered here. So I can only provide clarification, building on what you said, so that it gets further understood. And I think Mr. Semambo has summarized it. I mean, you've combined investment plan with the blended finance, and I think there are 3 things you said there. Firstly, if you look at Uganda and Africa, over 80% is in the informal sector. So, if you want to build climate resilience, you build with the majority, and these are the informal sector, where you have 77% of young people. So, any financing, and I personally argue this, any climate finance that targets Africa and misses at the informal sector is no longer climate finance. Because what is it for? You build resilience of the vulnerable people. So climate finance should be climate finance to build resilience of vulnerable people. And anything less than that, I think we need to start pushing it. So that was a very good point that you brought. The next aspect that I'm just building on is that you will have these young people and even our mothers in communities who have never had a bank account or even belonged to a cooperative. So what this tool is integrating is, can they have what we call a shot of the arm is if a young person who is viable from a skill perspective and can be able to develop or produce something that is in line with the NDC, and that is proven, he can then be able to be given support over a period of time. And that's where government comes in. Will he pay tax? Will he have tax holidays if it was an enterprise he created? And that's where in the compendium of the menu that the recommendations are proposing is, can government provide tax incentives for any person who develop an enterprise in driving a climate action area? That's one. The second will be waiving taxes for those who are already doing it, if it is proved that they are doing it. And that enables now loans to be given to them at a low interest rate. So what we are developing here is one part, the enabling environment is another. And I like the way you put it, it's not a Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Finance that everybody has to play a part in this. The Ministry of Finance playing a part. But I think Uganda is ahead. to have a climate finance unit that is newly created and these discussions are happening. Honestly speaking, I feel like the best opportunity that has ever happened, because the climate finance unit can take this and run with it in collaboration with other actors and start piloting this with the support of every actor in the room. I think I will stop here.
Thank you very much.
George, my friend, for that. I think, firstly, the let's call the solar dryers, agroforestry, solar power irrigation as start-up areas. Start-up areas. Because you need to start from somewhere. But the logic is inclusive of every priority in the NDC. So these are more demonstration starting points. I think that's one clarification. Then two, on where is the NDA? So this was for this was just for example. Government is here, so we could have put government here. So NDF was on the Ministry of Finance and all others MDAs that are very relevant in this space and for them. So we'll replace this. Or we can just release the names. So that's why this discussion was important. Have I answered? The shortest answer today, right? Thank you.
Presentation, the definition of a blended finance facility or fund from the OECD, the strategic use of development finance for the mobilization of additional finance towards sustainable development in developing countries. Are we still going with that definition? Is that what's guiding our vision here? And if so, then do we not have to have a more pointed conversation about which sources of development finance, climate finance, are we thinking of targeting? So I don't know who wants to answer that. Richard, anyone else?
Yes. And I think the answer is both. Development finance is needed. How fast does it come? The jury is out. But African countries are also raising money. Can that be leveraged to get more development finance? I think it's a yes. So only focusing on developing finance, I think, will be like abandoning what is already happening, which could be utilized to capitalize very quickly, and giving also the length of time that we know that GCF and JEF like a year or two. So development, that is why this is called innovative, which then changes the definition of blended immediately from the perspective that yes, development finance have to come in, we have to focus on this aspect, but at the same time, also leverage internally to drive the model. Prof, you can add. And Mr. Semambo.
And welcome back, everyone. I'm sure you must have taken that wonderful matoke with a peanut soup that is actually the best that I've ever tasted in any country in Africa. So when I'm here, I'll come back here more to eat that peanut soup, which is quite very, very exciting. But the bottom line is, we have to get back to business. And before we went on break, first of all, let me appreciate on behalf of the CHI team and UNEP and the UNEP CCC and the government here and all the stakeholders who are here, state and non-state actors, your wonderful contributions. And I want to start off before I get to this diagram by saying one thing. If there is no challenge, then there's nothing to solve. So if everything was okay, then we will not be here. And the reason we are here is because we all have different innovative ideas that we can contribute so we can create this tool that is applicable and realistic and can fit into the contextual reality of Uganda and Africa to a larger extent. That said, before we went on break, I will start from the question that was asked by a colleague, why we are talking about SACCOs and the interest rate is very high. And if we are talking about SACCOs and the interest rate is very high, then he doesn't know how we are going to move with that when accessibility
is quite very, very difficult because of high interest rates. That's the starting point. And the second point was about 15% from the budget allocated to drive the unconditional aspects of the Uganda NDC. And it was my good friend from the Climate Change Finance Unit who also mentioned that. So the point I'm trying to bring up here is that this tool that we are here to provide input, provide suggestions to be improved and advanced, needs to be seen beyond just finance as cash. Let me just repeat that. So it needs to be seen beyond just finance as cash. Because if you give cash, liquid cash, to a community that is not ready from a skills perspective, you will still default as a financing institution. Are we together? Hello? Excellent. I wanted to hear that echo. You know, we just came back from lunch. So I want to know that we're together. So the idea of overarchingly is that this tool have different components that needs to be applied holistically to then constitute an innovative approach to operationalize the NDC investment plan. And why do I say innovative? When you look at this diagram, the starting point, as you will see here, is a stop working. In my place, they will say it's witchcraft. Yeah. But anyway, we have to adapt, which is part of adaptation is important, right? So it was working, it stopped, so witchcraft came in here. So the jokes aside. So when you look at this, what you will notice, you will see training as the pillar of the investment financing tool, which is innovative in nature, which I'm going to explain. Training is number one. Training for what? Government actors, especially in the Ministry of Finance, should be trained to understand how using the lens of climate action can drive an economic-wide transformational development towards achieving your Vision 2040 and NDP 4. At the same time, even those who give finances, whether it is commercial banks, it is microfinancing organizations or SACCOs, needs to be educated and trained to understand the areas which include agroforestry, it includes solar power irrigation and solar dryers and beyond, to practically showcase what returns on investment they can be able to get and also understand the principles in terms of the application of this. That's one. The communities need to be trained to be able to apply solar dryers, solar power irrigation. And that is why this blended financing is not a standalone. It needs a lot of support from development partners, from government, from non-state actors to be able to function. So when you look at this blending finance, it's actually a tool that coalesces and brings everyone together around sectors, around institutions, to be able to deliver on the common good for the country. And the idea originally is that when you look, I go back to that question, interest rate is high. Who regulates interest rate? The central bank. And the central bank works for, is part of government. So if a central bank regulates interest rates, let's leave the cash part aside. If the central bank regulates interest rates, it means that the concern of the SACCO with interest rate very high, commercial banks high, can only be addressed by the central bank taking action. That's one dimension. And that then means in your budget of 2022 and 2023 was $12.6 billion US dollars. If the central bank is to allocate just 0.1%, we're talking about 12.6 million. That can be an instrument that can be able to be used to de-risk cooperative central bank to give loans at low interest rate against that 12.6 million, for example. That's one dimension. At the same time, I was reading where I think it was 2 years ago, in the financial budget, I think it was 2020, 2021, and I stand to be corrected, where VAT was removed from clean cooking gas. What does that then mean? It means that there was a de-risking from government through incentives, tax incentives or physical incentives. Which means if the young people who are producing who are producing briquettes, from waste to briquettes or from waste to bagasse, can be able to be trained to produce those, they have already been incentivized financially, indirectly, through taking off VAT. Why I'm bringing all this dimension is that we are not starting from scratch, but the tool is a system thinking approach that can be applied holistically. And so when you see central bank here providing a de-risking tool, and resources can come from the 15%, which can then be used to develop a de-risking facility, like what happened during COVID. You will see governments coming up with a stimulus program that stimulated and supported other parts of the economy.
Some notes, and to ensure that my thought process flows in a very coherent way. Firstly, let me start by recognizing Mr. Semambo for your indefatigable efforts, not only in terms of attending the meeting, but on behalf of your ministry, with Bob and your entire team, for actually taking on this project as your baby and actually dedicating effort to really see that it takes the right direction to serve the country. So let's give a round of applause for the Ministry of Water and the Climate Change Department. To the Ministry of Finance, thank you very much for not only coming in, but at least, as James has said, showcasing that at least there is a new climate unit that needs inputs and innovative inputs, and that what is coming out here can actually fit into that. I think that is going to be a huge policy shift in that this project resulted in supporting a unit that responds to the national priorities of the country in driving climate change. And I think even in terms of evaluation of this project, it can show that it fed into something that was really needed in the country. And that's a big win. And to your entire team, please, Lynette and everyone there. To you, Prof, I don't know, I lack words to express appreciation, but I build on what my colleague James has said. To the entire fantastic team. You took over a baby that we didn't know the color, we didn't know how big or small the baby is going or was going to be. And now, as James has said, we have a document that can be enriched based on the ideas that came out yesterday. So all I want to say is you have done exceptionally well, and we not only look up to you and your team, but the entire continent and the world is looking up to you. So let's give a round of applause to Prof and his team, the entire Chai team. This was just introduction. Now give me some few minutes now to go through. I don't want to dilute what James has said, and I think he summarized the entire, if you allow me, I'll call it the visionary approach of what this work intends to do. And like I said yesterday, and Prof have also said it, when new things are difficult from two perspectives. In terms of where do we go and what do we do with it. The second is ambition. We feel with new things sometimes you feel like you're not doing enough or you want to do a lot, and then you get somehow lost in the process. And because of that, I think the meeting yesterday
was very important. And one of the things that came out was that nobody said to remove anything. They brought in additions. And I think that is a big win. First of all, there was no rejection of this. There was a need for it. And because there was a need for it, it means we are doing the right thing. Both from the government side, both from the non-state actor side, I saw unanimous agreement and the urgency of such a tool for the country, which is a good thing. The second aspect is that the discussion, which I saw something that came out very clear yesterday, is it's not just about finance, but we need finance. And what this tool is going to be about is not that we are designing a financing facility, but we are designing a tool that can help the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, and non-state actors to be able to drive financial accessibility to those who need it most, especially the informal sector and the youth. And that way, it means that our work doesn't only stop from the document that Prof and the team is going to produce, but we're going to take that document to support government, to support commercial microfinance circles, and even to support individual citizens to then be able to understand what they need to be able to de-risk themselves. And yesterday what was coming out was that individuals must de-risk themselves to be able to be viable for financial accessibility from either side. And that way also make donors to easily see that, oh, there is a ready environment that if resources were coming into Uganda, either through government or through private sector, there is already enabled environment from the perspective of people who know what they are doing, people, banks that understand what they can get from the NDC areas that they want to invest in, and at the same time, a government that is ready already with a finance unit that have taken into consideration guidance as a tool to then drive it down. The last aspect, which I think Mr. Simambo has been hammering this all through, and I like it. Firstly, thanks for differentiating between loans and grants yesterday. I think you lowered the expectation, which was a good thing. Thanks a lot. The second is the parish development model. How do we integrate it to be part and parcel of this tool so that the tool is coming to facilitate also that, and at the same time facilitate the local finances that Bob and Dennis are in Brussels discussing, that if those resources were there, they can then be able to be leveraged to bolster that already existing parish development model, either helping them to access financing beyond just government facilitated finance, but to also private finance, which I think that would be an added value, as Mr. Simambo keeps saying. We need to see additionality, added value, novelty. The last part is just an aspect I wanted to mention here, which is more huge thanks to non-state actors and